"Excuse me, I'd like to return this book." Mark sighed. Not another one. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," he said, turning around on his stool to find the short redhead already looking unhappy. "But all sales are final." She was tapping a copy of Wind in the Willows on the desk, and Mark grimaced as he saw the cover bow a little. When Mark had opened up this used bookstore, his retirement, he liked to joke, he had expected simple days of reading, writing, and enjoying conversations with fellow bibliophiles. What actually ended up happening was a constant stream of book collectors, people looking for deals, and homeless people looking for somewhere to use the bathroom. He'd been here for less than a month, and everything seemed to be going wrong already. Case in point, this mysterious thing with the books. He opened Wind in the Willows and knew what he would find inside. The beautiful illustrations of Toad Hall were there, but the words were gone. Some of the words were there, he noticed, as he flipped through the pages, but the majority of them were gone. This was the 10th book like this he had received in as many days, and it was becoming a big problem. He couldn't sell the books with missing words, and he shook his head as he opened the register and took out the $5 the lady had spent on it. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I have no idea how this keeps happening with these books, but I mean to get to the bottom of this." The lady nodded, mollified. "See that you do, young man. I had bought it for my grandson, and he was very disappointed to find it in such a state." Mark nodded, but quietly suspected that her grandson hadn't given much of a damn about the book. Most of the child customers didn't have the attention span for anything without pictures. Wind in the Willows was probably not on his radar, and the little goblin would have probably preferred the Captain Underpants books he had on the display rack near the graphic novels. Mark waited until she was gone and moved out into the shop proper so that he could look through some of the books. He didn't know how this was happening, but he wanted it to stop. Words suddenly missing from books was bad for someone who paid the bills off the backs of bibliophiles, and as he started pulling random books off the shelves, he was alarmed to see that the tales of adventure around Toad Hall were not the only casualty. After an hour, he found 3 Dean Koontz novels, a couple of John Grisham's, and 3 Stephen King's, one of them a hardback copy of Firestarter, and about 7 more from writers he wasn't as familiar with that were either missing words or missing whole chapters. It was infuriating, especially since he didn't understand how it was happening. He could understand if the books had been wrecked, but the books were often in perfect condition, except for the missing words. The copy of Firestarter could have gone for $25 to $45, and there wasn't a dog ear or a coffee stain to be found on it. Mark threw it across the store, pouting like a child as someone walked in and found him sitting in his little pile of ruined books. "Geez, Mark, have a little more respect for the written word." Mark cast his best unimpressed expression at Wayne before tossing a John Grisham at him, which he dodged. "I've got all the respect in the world for the written word. I just don't understand why it chooses to treat me like this." Wayne opened up the copy of Firestarter, the corner now dented in, and tutted as he looked over the pages. "That's really weird. How long's that been going on?" Mark slumped against the shelf, closing his eyes as he tried to fight off the headache that was building. "'Bout 2 weeks." Wayne stroked his chin, humming in a very convincing manner. Wayne was known in a lot of bookseller circles as a practicing wizard. That was the nicest thing that he was usually known as, and a lot of them called him a nut or a crazy. Wayne also had a pretty substantial following online, running a paranormal podcast and doing a lot with the local ghost hunting community, so he had money to burn. Wayne liked him. They had hit it off after a few encounters, and now Wayne came in almost every day. "Could be something supernatural," Wayne said, looking over at the John Grisham that Mark had thrown at him. "Tell you what, let me ask around and see if anyone else has experienced anything like this." Mark shrugged. "Couldn't hurt, I guess. Shoot, there might be something to that. Maybe I've got an angry poltergeist that likes stealing words or something." Wayne shook his head, flipping the pages and looking at the words still on the page. "I doubt it. Ghosts usually don't affect things like this. I guess anything is possible, but I've never heard of a ghost stealing words from a book. I don't know. I'll ask around. Maybe it's something I can help you with." He took the copy of Firestarter with him, with Mark's blessing, and Mark started cleaning up as he moved the damaged books to a box behind the counter. His expectations were low, but he hoped that Wayne could help. He loved his bookstore, and he didn't want to close up shop due to something mysterious that was out of his control. Let it be poor bookkeeping, or lack of interest, or a fire, but not something he had completely no control over. Whether Mark succeeded or failed, he wanted it to be on his own efforts. Mark flipped the sign from open to close and locked the door as he prepared to go into his loft over the shop. It had been an all-right day. He had sold about $200 in books, thanks in part to Mrs. Shaw's summer reading list, but he'd found 4 more books with missing words. Nothing quite as financially devastating as the copy of Firestarter from earlier, but it was beginning to add up. The box of ruined books was now 20 in number, and Mark knew that there would be more. He turned off the lights on his little book kingdom and moved upstairs to start dinner. That was a problem for tomorrow, because now it was time to work on his real passion. Mark went up the stairs to his cozy little studio apartment, and after making something in the microwave, he sat down in front of his old typewriter to set to work on his novel. The novel was a sequel to his only bestseller, Ghosts of Lorelei. The book had been immensely popular about a decade ago, even getting a single season on NBC before being canceled, and a lot of reasons that the bookstore could operate in the red for as long as it had was thanks to the book sales from Ghost of Lorelei. His editor had been on him about writing a sequel for years, and after 10 years of middling crime novels and lukewarm police procedurals, Mark had decided to give it a go. Ghosts of Lorelei had been about Detective Jack Stryker as he hunted for a missing schoolgirl named Lorelei Hester. Lorelei's ghosts were the rumors, the friends, and the trail that grew colder by the day. Stryker found the girl, but it turned out that she hadn't been abducted, as her parents believed. Lorelei had overdosed on something on the roof of an abandoned building, but Stryker had to exorcise her ghosts, the masks that she had showed to others. When he finally discovered the real Lorelei, it was too late to save her, and Stryker was left with the bitter taste of failure and the corpse of a girl looking for escape. It had been a great story, and people had loved Stryker, the grizzled old detective who was sure that he had seen it all. His editor wanted a sequel, maybe a series about Jack Stryker, but Mark had never quite liked crawling into the skin of the old man. That's what he called it when he wrote, crawling into the skin and playing pretend for a while. Jack Stryker's skin, however, was leathery and not altogether comfortable. That's why it had taken him so long to get back to him, and why it had taken him so long to start the fiery effigy. He was clacking away, liking the feel of the keys beneath his fingers as he worked. Most people had upgraded to a computer or something by now, but Mark liked the way that writing on a typewriter made him feel. Something about hearing the click-clack of the keys, seeing the paper fill with words, and then running a fresh sheet in when you were done made his writing feel like an accomplishment rather than a chore. His editor wasn't such a big fan, not really liking the manila envelopes that he got with pages in need of editing, but Mark told him that was tough shit. If he wanted the story, then he could take it Mark's way, or not at all. Mark was enjoying his trip back to Chicago in the early 60s, Jack Stryker chasing a serial killer who seemed to have an axe to grind with Stryker himself. All the victims so far had been people he had helped, clients or friends or old colleagues from his time on the force, and all of them had been burned to death. Captain Reinhold seemed to think that Stryker might be in on this, a suspect if not the killer, and Stryker found himself at odds with the police as he tried to track down the sicko. The killer was 3 victims deep now, but Stryker was hot on his tail. He had chased him to an old apartment building. He was chasing him up the stairs, the lights dim and making his target hard to identify, and as they came to the roof, Stryker felt he had him at long last. He kicked open the roof access, his big old .45 out and ready, as he checked his corners and looked for the man who had been killing his friends. "It's over," he graveled out, taking a step out of the doorway. "There's nowhere to go but back the way you came. I've got you dead to rights." Mark hissed, letting the Salisbury steak fall into the plastic holder as it burned his tongue. He blew on the meat, his eyes never leaving the page, and tried the bite again as Stryker made his way across the roof. He was checking the spaces between two big AC units when someone lunged and knocked his gun away. The two tussled, the man's hood covering his face, but as Stryker pushed the hood away, he gasped in surprise as much as in pain when the man pushed him back and made a run for it. "You!" Stryker said, watching him run for the stairs. "It can't be! You died 20 years ago!" He grabbed for his gun, but the shot missed as the hooded man made it back into the stairwell. Stryker tried to follow, but he was still 10 feet away when the door banged open, and two patrolmen came out with guns drawn. "Jack Stryker, you're under arrest for the murder of Frank Richard and Moira Fisk. Drop your gun and put your hands up." Mark nodded as the sheet came out, loading a fresh one in as he typed. Yeah, this was good. This was real good. As someone laid on their horn on the street below, Mark sat up violently. He was in bed, a book laid across his chest as the lamp on the nightstand glared in his eyes. The car horn had only been half the fright. He had been dreaming, having a real nightmare. He'd been down in the shop, the whole place shadowy and muzzy, and every book he pulled off the shelf was empty. All of them, every single one, was empty of any words. They were piling up, their covers full of fresh white paper, and as he dropped them, they became a sea of pages. They churned and bucked, threatening to swallow him into the inky depths, and just as his head had threatened to go under, he had woken up with a start as the car horn blared. Mark looked at the clock and found that it was about 5:30. He could get up, make some breakfast, and write for a few hours before he had to open up the shop. Last night he had written so much, getting through the interrogation scene and Stryker's escape from custody. Now he was on the run, trying to find the killer before the cops caught up with him. Mark figured he was about 75% done, in the home stretch now, and he would soon send it all to his editor for final proofing. 20 minutes later, a breakfast sandwich in his hand, Mark sat down to start writing the search for the killer. Stryker now knowing who it was, but not sure how to find him. He had a fresh piece of paper in the typewriter, glancing down at the manuscript before freezing in pure dread. He picked up the top sheet, the start of Chapter 9, and his hands shook as he looked at it. There were holes in the paragraphs, gaps where the words had been neatly removed. "How?" he whispered, his hands shaking so badly that he thought he might tear the page. "How can this be?" It was one thing when it was down in the shop. There was no way he could go over every piece of inventory to make sure it was whole. But this was something he knew had been completed. He had written this. This was his. And now it was like moths had come in the night and eaten holes in it. Mark was shocked, outraged, and as the paper ripped near the middle, he forced himself to put it back down. He would have to recreate it. He would need that sheet to get it just right. He didn't know what he would do, but Mark knew that he had to do something. The bookstore was his retirement, but this was his livelihood. He had to protect this by any means necessary. "Excuse me," said a young fella, and Mark saw him flinch as he turned to look at him. Mark must have looked a mess, but that was to be expected. He'd been writing like a madman for the last 3 days, and for those 3 days he had been sending his work off at the end of each session. Sometimes this facilitated a trip to the mailbox at 3 in the morning. Sometimes it left him tired as he opened the shop the next day. But it was worth it, if it saved his manuscript. His agent likely thought he was losing it, and maybe he was, but it kept whatever was doing this from eating his work. I was just wondering if you had any of the old Star Wars paperbacks," the kid said, stuttering a little as Mark cast his bloodshot eyes on him. "Third row, middle shelf," Mark growled, turning back to his computer screen as he furiously worked on his inventory. It wasn't hopeful. Mark had discovered about 15 books over the last 3 days, and the box was becoming fuller and fuller as he went on. He had lost about $500 of stock so far, and he knew that there was more to be found. The kid came up with a few books, one of them going into the box as Mark discovered that it had been ruined too. The guy wanted to buy it anyway, and Mark lifted an eyebrow as he handed it to him. The guy was leafing through it, looking at the holes in the paragraphs and shaking his head. "That's wild. How did you do it? I've never—" But he stopped as he glanced at Mark's face. Mark had been holding out his receipt, but it had gotten crushed in his shaking fingers as he glared at the kid. "You think I did this? You think I would do this to my books? Who the hell are you? Get out! Get out now!" Mark was unaware that he was shouting, but he couldn't stop himself. The guy might as well be accusing him of murder, and when he ran out of the store with his books, he nearly bowled over Wayne as he ran out. "Huh," Wayne said as he watched the guy take off. "You having a fire sale or something? Deals must be good. That guy practically sprinted off." Mark shook his head, pointing at the box of books. "Where have you been? Thought you were going to get me some answers. I'm losing books by the day here." Wayne put his hands up. "Easy, hoss. Apparently what you've got is pretty rare. It isn't something that a lot of people know about, and I had to look pretty far to get you answers." He took a little book out of his pocket and opened it to a marked page before laying it on the counter. Inside were a pair of mischievous-looking foxes, words hanging from their mouths, and they appeared to be eating them. The words ruin or rune were written above them, and Mark thought the name was pretty fitting. Even so, he looked at the page skeptically. Are you telling me that foxes are stealing my words?" "No, not foxes. Runes, or ruins. Translation wasn't very clear, but it's definitely something like that. They're from Germanic folklore, little creatures who eat written words. They also collect secrets and will ruin archives and libraries. They used to be favored by wizards who used them to steal their enemies' secrets, but now the ones that are left usually just make trouble for writers and bookstore owners." "Seems like something I should have heard about," Mark grumbled. Wayne winked at him. "Hard to, when the little buggers eat most of the accounts of them." "Okay," Mark said, still not believing any of it. "So, how do we get rid of them?" "We trap them. We catch them in a journal, or something that contains secrets that they can't resist. Then we trap them inside with magic. Once they're trapped, they'll eventually wither away when they run out of words to eat, or someone comes along and breaks the magic on the book and they go free. By the time either of those things happen, they'll have gotten rid of the book anyway. Most people throw it away or bury it in a hole, but some people put it in a lockbox just to be sure." Mark sighed, not sure he believed a word of this, but willing to try anything if it would stop this from happening. "Okay, what would it take to do this?" "Give me a couple of days to get the proper stuff together, and I'll conduct the ritual for you. The materials are pretty cheap. I'll come by tomorrow night after closing, and we'll get this done. Sound good?" Sure, Mark said, letting Wayne get back to whatever occupied his day. Mark didn't think anything would come of it, but whatever could be done. If nothing else, maybe it would help him figure out what exactly was going on. Either way, it would break up his usual routine, and Mark felt that if he spent another day watching his profits slip down the toilet, he'd go crazy. His phone rang then, and when he answered, it was with the usual, "Second Chance Books, Mark speaking." His agent cleared his throat and asked if he was feeling okay. "Terry," Mark said, feeling a little better as his agent's voice rolled over him. "A little stressed about the new shop, but I've been converting it into work on the book. Why, is there something wrong with the new pages?" "Yeah," Terry said, sounding less than amused. "You sent me 3 envelopes in the last 3 days, and they've been getting weirder and weirder." Mark furrowed his brow. "How so? I thought the story was progressing well." "Well, the second envelope looked like someone took whiteout to it, and it's like playing Mad Libs to figure the story out. This last one is just blank sheets with random words on them. I know I said I wanted to see results on this book, Marky, but if you're having a mental breakdown, then maybe take a day or two to collect yourself, all right?" Mark felt the phone shake in his hand, his voice barely holding up as he told Terry that he would get some rest and feel better. Terry said that sounded great and wished him well before hanging up on him. Mark let his cell phone fall beneath the desk, putting his head in his hands as he wept. He had been careful, so careful, he had sent it away to stop this kind of thing from happening, but it was all in vain. They had gotten his manuscripts anyway. They had eaten it up, and they would do it again. Mark found himself thinking of the ruins or runes as something real now, and as he wept, he wondered what he was going to do. If this ritual or whatever didn't work, just what the hell was he going to do? When Wayne arrived the next night, he found the store closed. He knocked, and when Mark answered the door, Wayne could tell he was drunk. "Geez, Mark, you had it a little early, aren't you?" Mark shrugged, but he didn't deny it. In reality, he had spent the night before drunk and had simply carried over into the next day. He had been beside himself as he tried to figure out what to do, and the whiskey had been an easy outlet. Mark had never been a big drinker, but he found it soothing to fall into a comfortable numbness. He had come out of it just in time to remember that Wayne was coming over around 7, and he had stumbled downstairs just in time to hear him knock. He let him in, and Wayne produced a mead notebook from his coat. "I collected some secrets from my counterparts. Some of them are pretty juicy, too. If this doesn't draw them in, then nothing will." He passed the notebook to Mark, telling him not to open it as he sketched some symbols on the bar. Mark watched the lines bulge and swirl as his head reeled a little. There were squiggles inside the circle, ancient-looking letters and strange crabbed swirls, and as he finished, he bit his thumb and dropped some blood into the center. To Mark's amazement, the circle glowed faintly, and when Wayne took the journal and positioned it in the center of the circle, the two stepped back like hunters from a trap. "Now we wait," he explained, but it didn't take long. It was like watching graffiti move, and Mark thought he might be hallucinating. He saw these sketches of foxes moving across the counter. Some looked like pen, some looked like pencil, and there were even a few that looked like charcoal prints. They were in many different styles and skill levels, and they all made their way towards the book. They entered the pages, eating the secrets, and when the last of them hopped in, Wayne struck. He lurched forward and slammed the book shut, the symbols burning themselves into the notebook. Mark heard a small scream from the counter. Wayne waited for the burn marks to stop forming before picking up the notebook and holding it out to Mark. "All gone. You should be fine now." Mark started to reach for it, but felt like he didn't really want to touch it. He told Wayne to take it, and the man seemed happy to oblige. He said he had hoped to study the little creatures, and as he left, he was humming happily to himself. Mark was just glad to be rid of them, and he felt better than he had in days. Mark jerked awake again, almost certain that the last 4 days had been a dream. He was lying in bed, a book across his chest, and felt like maybe he had been dreaming everything after the car had woke him up. If it hadn't been for the hangover, he might have even believed it. He had celebrated a little more after Wayne had taken the ruin away. Or was it rune? Mark couldn't remember, but he was glad they were gone. He had reached down to close the book when something caught his eye. Someone had doodled a little animal on the edge of the page, a dog or something, and Mark wondered how he'd never seen it before. When it moved off the page, still clutching a word in its mouth, Mark realized the truth. It landed on the floor, and Mark rolled off the bed and gave chase. It was like a cartoon, the little pencil-drawing fox easily escaping him as he ran after it. Mark didn't know what he would even do if he caught it, didn't know if he could catch it, but he knew he was mad. They had been caught, trapped in the journal, and the thought that one had been missed pissed him off mightily. It would get away and make more, and then they would continue to torment him. He had to nip this in the bud, get it before it could escape, and as it slipped under the door, he thundered down the stairs after it. He came into the shop, still livid, and that's when he saw them. The ruin, or rune, or whatever it was, disappeared into the shop. but the shining eyes of multitudes looked back at him in the light spilling from the stairwell. There were so many of them that Mark knew they would never get them all. It was hopeless. They would never stop. Not unless he stopped them. The gasoline went up as it took hold of the bookshelf, and Mark laughed in his stupor as they burned. It was like a roach infestation, he thought, as it caught the dry books. Better to burn the whole nest and start over than spend months or years fighting them. He laughed like Nero as he watched Rome burn, and it wasn't until it was too late that he realized he was trapped. That made him laugh all the harder. It looked like the fiery effigy was him in the end. Stryker's story would never be told, and he would take it with him to the grave. Before he passed out, Mark thought that at least these little terrors wouldn't have his final story. He had ruined it all himself, and hopefully took them with him. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.